All right, hello and welcome to today's training on how to answer behavioral interview questions. I am so delighted that you're here. The purpose of today's training is to help you become more well-prepared and confident in selling yourself for interviews. Specifically, I'm going to dive in more in terms of how to think of your examples, what employers look for, and what to highlight in your answers. So that's what I'm really going to cover today. This is considered a more advanced interview training session here. So here's what I'm going to cover. I will provide you an overview in terms of overall interview tips, and I will then move into job-specific competencies for some particular roles. What are the top skills that employers are looking for these days? And then I'll walk you through the behavioral interview framework as well of how to answer specific questions. And then I'll walk you through some sample questions and answers as well. So that's what we're going to cover today. It will probably be an hour or a bit more training there. Okay. If you have any questions, feel free to type into the chat room as well. Okay, so first things first, the purpose of behavioral interviews. Why do we have behavioral interviews? Really, it's for interviewers to really understand how you've approached and performed situations in the past to help evaluate your fit for the job and help predict your future performance. You want to be able to demonstrate certainty, confidence in a capability that you did well in the past and that will succeed in this new role. Okay? And this is why how you tell your story really matters. What you share and how you communicate matters. Okay? A lot of times I find, part of interview prep, people spend a lot of time with the what in terms of what they want to say, what they want to share, but they don't spend enough time on the how, which is really that the practice, the recording, where you sound more like comfortable and fluid. So I really want to encourage you, when you have interviews coming up, make sure that you're also giving enough time to actually practice either with a friend or a buddy or with me to get that feedback where you sound more confident and natural. So how do you prepare for behavioral interviews? I'll walk you through some steps that you consider as you think of your examples. First is you want to create a spreadsheet to summarize your examples and competencies. This could also be in a Word document where you create a table. The goal here is you want to be organized with your thoughts. Second is that you want to ask yourself, what's important to the employer? So you want to analyze a job. Even if you don't have, let's say, the job description or the JD, you can just use an example that you find and ask yourself what's important to the employer as an exercise. Step 3 is to then think of situations, examples, and stories from your past career or jobs. And you want to start with some action verbs, such as you developed, created, built, launched, analyzed, whatever that is, to help you think of examples. Okay. Now, for those of you who don't have a lot of experience, you can also think of examples from your studies as well, projects that you've done. Fourth is to identify the top 3 skills used in that scenario. What are those common skills? This could be problem solving, communication, leadership, critical thinking skills, whatever that is. Okay, so you want to map out those thoughts there. And then lastly is to think critically about the impact of your actions, of what they resulted in, right? Based on what you did, what did you influence and impact? Some of one of the common thing I see in interviews, or especially those are more senior level roles where you're leading people or managing a team. Oftentimes, people use we versus I. And in an interview, you're trying to qualify yourself for the job. So you really want to have that balanced use of I versus we as well. Okay, so this is an overview in terms of how you can think of your prepare for behavioral interviews, and I'll walk you through more steps later on as well. Okay, the key here, what I found, I've seen some clients done this, is that if you create like a spreadsheet or a table, it really just helps you go into like any interview situation, and you can then tailor accordingly depending on the job. So even if you don't have an interview coming up, you can still do this exercise as part of the preparation there. All right, so what are some of the common interview mistakes? This is some of the common ones that I've seen that could lead to a rejection. And from my experience, I hear from interviewers and hiring managers. The first is the lack of confidence, right? And when you lack that confidence, you may not come across as persuasive or convincing. You may not be able to demonstrate that you are confident in your own abilities. So it is so key, part of it is really believing in what you have to offer there. The second is the lack of connection. So this goes into the whole rapport building, the trust, the relationship that you have with the interviewer, the chemistry as well. A lot of times when we're going interviews, you may be nervous. And one of the technique is really just being present and to really listen to the interviewer, what they have to say to really connect with them there. The third is a lack of clear communication. So this is so key, and this is why I do trainings like this, is the piece around what are you trying to say? What are you trying to communicate? If you're not clear, it's really hard for the interviewer to take good notes and to debrief your candidacy with other interviewers or the committee there. The last piece is the lack of compelling examples. So this goes back to, do you have solid examples to share to back up essentially your qualifications, your skills and expertise to the hiring manager there? Okay, so these are the 4 things to keep in mind. This is from my experience, especially when I was recruiting at Google. I've seen so many applications and gone through a lot of calibrations with hiring managers. These are usually the 4 key things that I hear from hiring managers. And another one I hear is, that they call that fire, that passion in you, where you really want that job. And so this goes back to your whole energy and your presence of how you convey your enthusiasm for the opportunity there. All right, so I want to cover a little bit on how to develop a winning mindset. This goes back to the confidence piece. If you don't have that, it's really hard to convince the manager. So I really want to go through some tips here to help you out. So first is to change your beliefs and stories. So this goes back to what are some of the stories that you're telling yourself that could be hindering you, or that may project a negative perception of you there. So for example, some of you may tell me that, I just see what I do just a job, or there is really nothing special about me, or I don't really see what I've really accomplished. We really need to change that thinking and be able to really uncover what are some things that you've done or the impact that you've made. Or some of you may tell me that I just hate talking about myself. And this is where we got to change that too, that, what is it that you love about yourself? What do you admire about yourself? Or thinking from the perspective of how do you be of service? Or what do your friends and colleagues, how they describe you there? Second is to really value your work, skills, and experience. Okay, so this goes hand in hand. If you don't value yourself, it's really hard for an employer to value you. So this is why I give exercises for people to do on identifying your proud accomplishments. What are your strengths? What are your core skills? By looking at that, you're really seeing what are your assets of what you have to offer there. Third is to be proud of what you've accomplished, okay? Whether it's small or big, you want to be proud of what you've accomplished. Fourth is to believe you have what it takes. This goes back to the confidence piece and the affirmation that, I have what it takes, that I am marketable, I'm valuable. And lastly, one of my favorite saying is to really own your greatness with confidence to shine. Okay? So this has to go back to the core of you, deep inner work and really believing yourself that you have what it takes in order to really persuade and convince the interviewers there. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next section here, which is the job-specific competency. So I'm going to go through some specific areas of the jobs here. So first things first is that you got to understand the need, right? So I mentioned this in my motivational training last week there. You really need to understand the hiring need of what they are looking for in order for you to tailor the answers. So you can anticipate questions by understanding the job-specific competencies required to succeed. Okay, so this is going back to analyzing the job description. Then you want to map out the key competencies for the role to help you identify your examples to use. Okay, so you remember that exercise I mentioned earlier. This is part of it, analyzing that. All right, so I'm going to go through some samples here. Marketing job competencies for you. Regardless whether you're in this area, I'm sure you'll pick up a few things that could be applicable to your area as well. So I want you to pay attention to that. Okay, so then on the marketing job competencies. So type of roles could be marketing strategy, product marketing, brand management, and advertising. So these are some of the things that hiring managers could be looking for, such as, do you have experience developing a go-to-market strategy and plan? Have you created and launched marketing campaigns? Have you grow market share and brand? Manage cross-functional teams? And your ability to handle and prioritize multiple projects. Okay, so these are some things you might want to consider. This is just an example for someone in a marketing career there of what a manager could be looking for. Okay, give me one sec. Okay, sorry, just a bit of background noise there. So some of these things that you want to keep in mind as you are going through the competencies. The next is I'll share with you is a sales job competency. So what some things that a hiring manager could be looking for. So type of roles could be in sales, business development, partnerships, customer success. Some of the things that a hiring manager would be looking for would be strong with managing client relationships, so good with people, achieve quota year over year. This is so important in sales. When I was recruiting for sales roles, a lot of times people want to know what your quota was, your achievement was the last 3 years or last 5 years. How you've grown the business, the territory, the vertical. You know, sometimes they may have preference in a specific industry in terms of clients that you've worked with as well, and have a sales methodology. This is really key, I think, for those who are in more senior, seasoned experience level roles. A lot of times they want to understand how you approach a deal or a sale, or how you approach a problem. So they're trying to understand your mindset. And then lastly is the knowledge of the product, solution, and industry. Okay, so these are things to keep in mind. I'm sure there are a few things you can also pick out for even the area that you're in as well. And especially, for example, like knowledge of like the product or solution. This is pretty common across different roles as well. Okay, so the next one is finance analysis jobs, the type of competencies there. So those who are in more analytical type of roles, these are things that you want to keep in mind. So this could be in finance, data analytics, consumer insights, equity research, risk management, reporting. Those are some examples. So some things that to be looking for would be strong technical acumen and enjoy dealing with numbers and data. So this is a clue that you want to be giving examples that have numbers, that you want to talk about numbers as well. How you handle ambiguous and complex problems. Have you created like accurate forecasts and models? Develop dashboard, KPIs, reports, or insights, and having good knowledge of the competitive landscape. Okay, so these are some examples, and I want to really encourage you when you do an analysis on, you know, the job competencies. After you've done this, is you really want to think about, okay, what are some examples that I could have demonstrated these type of qualities or these types of competencies are, okay, as a clue, because that is also an indicator of the type of questions that you may get to help you anticipate and predict questions. Okay. So I'm going to walk you through how you can think through your examples there, okay? And the way I like to think of it is the highs and lows. Okay? You can create a chart on this to think of the highs and lows. So for example, good experience, bad experience, wins and successes versus lost and failures, possibilities versus problems, collaborate versus conflict, plan versus delay, strengths versus weaknesses. Okay, so when you look at this, it will give you that, it's like that yin and the yang as well to look at examples. Like oftentimes, guarantee you're going to get some challenging questions around problems, conflict, delay, things not working out, bad experience. How did you overcome that? They're really trying to understand how did you react in these tough situations. On the flip side, they also want to understand, you know, things that where you've had positive experience and wins, because they also want to see what you value, what fulfills you, what excites you, what challenges you as well. Okay, so these are some things that you can do to help you reflect on examples there. All right, so the next is really the key soft skills that reflect potential. So this is a study that LinkedIn did over the years of really understanding what are the top key areas that hiring managers look for that reflect essentially high potential talent. So these are some of the key areas that I want to walk you through, because that's also going to help you think about some of the questions that you want to, you may get, and how you want to respond to some of them as well. And I do have a document of these popular interview questions that I can share with you later on as well. So one tip here is you want to use at least 2 examples from your recent role, as that is the most recent and could be also the most relevant. Even though if you think you've may had a bad experience in your most recent role, but because it's the most recent, you want to make sure you think about some examples you can share as well. Okay. The first is really the adaptability of what employers look for. So this is a common one. It's about 69% employers indicate that this is one of the most important skill that they look for. And what this could mean is really the change management, being agile, your flexibility, versatility. So these are some of the things that you want to be able to highlight in your answers and responses there. The next is really the culture add. Okay, so this ties into your fit, the values, the beliefs, interests, motivation, personality, and attitude. So that's really more like the character piece there that they look for. Okay. The third is really around collaboration. So this is around teamwork, communication, relationships, conflict management, and resourcefulness as well. Okay. And next is really the leadership piece, which ties into, I would say, any role as well, in terms of you taking initiative, being proactive, how you persuade, influence, decision-making, problem-solving, delegating, motivating, and inspiring. Okay, so these are some of the things that you want to be able to highlight when you get questions around that. The next is around prioritization. So this ties into the time management, planning, and organization. And lastly is around growth potential. So this ties into in terms of the ambition, achievements, results, performance, and value add. Okay, so these are some clues that I want you to keep in mind when you think about, these are like those, 6 key areas that have been identified as top key skills employers look for that reflect high potential talent. So you do want to be able to speak about these things in a way that present you as a high potential talent there. Okay. Do all positions look for growth potential? That's a good question. I mean, I think potential piece is really looking at also in terms of your likelihood to succeed in the role as well, right? So even though they may not be looking for potential of like, will you be able to advance your career? They will be looking at, will you succeed in this role? Would you be able to add value? So that's another way of thinking about it. It's really around that whole contribution piece there. Okay. Or they may be looking at it, what's the return on investment for them to hire you? Are you able to contribute more to our organization there? Okay, in the immediate, like even short term, in the next 6 months or 12 months. Great question, Chris. All right, so here's some of my reminders to keep in mind is to really focus on what you did, not what others did, okay? For an interview, even though you don't like talking about yourself, remember, you're trying to qualify yourself. So you got to distinguish what you did versus what others did, especially for those who are in leadership positions. So because one of the common things, even recruiters remind those who are in management positions is the balance between what did you manage or oversee versus what did you do. Okay, so you want to clearly distinguish that. What did you manage and oversee versus what did you actually do? Okay. Highlight your abilities, behaviors, and skills, as this is a way to also help predict your future performance there. Have a balanced use of we versus I. And lastly is to think before you answer the question. Okay? It's okay to pause. Silence is okay as well. It's actually showcasing that you are being thoughtful and it helps you structure your thoughts there better. Okay. Any other questions so far before I move into the next section? You're good? Okay. So let me walk you through the framework for the behavioral interview question. It's the CAR method. You've probably heard of the STAR method as well. I like the CAR method just because I like the rule of threes and it's just easier to remember there. So I'm going to teach you the CAR method today. The tip here is you want to follow a consistent framework to make it easier for interviewers to take better notes. Okay, that's really key why we use frameworks. And I've learned that. So when I was recruiting at Google, interviewers are required to take detailed notes of what the candidate said in order to score them and evaluate them. And so if you can guide them to take better notes, it just helps present your candidates as a stronger candidate there. And it showcases that you're a strong communicator. So the first C is what? It's the context and the challenges. So this is really that hook to help the interview understand the situation you faced. Okay, so this is where you really want to talk about. It's got that, I like to talk about, it's almost that hero's journey example. When you think about these superhero stories, there's always that situation or problem that you faced. Okay, so you want to paint that picture of the complexity of the situation or the significance of this project that you were faced with. You want to be able to talk about that. Then you move into the action and accomplishments. So this is the bulk of the time, which is, I would say, about 70 to 80% of the time speaking about this, of describing the specific steps that you took. Okay. So one of the technique here is that you want to be able to talk about, essentially think of sound bites of milestones of what you achieved during this project. Think of like 3 or 5 milestones, and then think about the specific steps to achieve that milestone there. Okay. Next is the R, which is the results and relevancy. So you want to summarize the outcome and the impact and connect the dots. So one thing I found in just practicing with a lot of clients, I find the conclusion is often the weakest for most people. So I really want to challenge you to really take the time to think about that. So what, the conclusion. So you want to summarize the overall story, but you also want to connect the dots back to how is this relevant to the job that you're interviewing for. So this is where you can talk about the skills that you've developed, lessons learned, what you learned from this experience. These are things that you can highlight to have that so what factor to connect it back to the job. Okay? Or if you are going for an interview, you can actually say, like, I understand this role requires someone to do this, and this is something I've been able to do there. Okay? Because you're trying to give them proof and confidence. Next, I'm going to walk you through specifically how to think through each section, and I'm going to break it down. So I'm going through like the nitty gritty with you here to help you break it down here. So how do you really set the context? So you want to set the stage to help the interviewer understand the significance and relevancy of the situation and what you achieved. Okay, because this is going to distinguish whether the problem you faced, was it like a big problem, a big massive problem, or was it like a small problem? Okay, so you want to really give that context there. So situation, you want to think about like, when did it happen? When I was at ABC company, okay, especially for those of you who worked at multiple companies, you want to just be clear to get them to look at the resume or the role that you had, like when I was at this company or when I was in this role at XYZ. What happened, right? There was a time I faced or I dealt with. Like, these are some guiding words you can use. So one of the techniques I always talk about is like really think of these guiding words you can use to help the interviewer to take better notes. And then you can talk about the issue. Why did it happen? The challenge was, or there was an issue with, okay? There's usually some sort of issue, right? And then you want to talk about the task and goal. What was your mission? What was your mandate? Okay, what were you trying to solve here? Okay, so you can say my job was to, or I was asked to, or it required me to use my skills at. Okay, so you see how I've broke it down. It's like 3 sections in the context part here, right? So you want to get them to understand, okay, when did it happen, where it happened, why did it happen, and what were you asked to do, so that it's really clear there. Okay, so that's the context piece. And this really should be, honestly, definitely less than a minute. Like, we're talking like 30 seconds here of describing that situation. Okay, and this is why the preparation is so key, to be really clear what the situation that you're trying to set. And one thing I want to be clear here is whenever you get a question like tell me a time or tell me a situation, they are looking for a specific incident or a situation. Okay, so don't be vague with like, about handling conflict and you talk about just general philosophies of it. It's too vague. You got to be specific of an incident there. Next is, how do you clearly state the actions? Okay, so this is the bulk of the content here. You want to be specific and clear, avoid irrelevant details. Okay, so what I mean by that is you want to avoid things like he said, she said, I went through all these things. You just want to get to the point of what you're trying to highlight there. All right, and I'm going to give you some examples later on. So milestone 1, for example, you want to think of the marketing soundbite of the objective of what you did. So first, as an example, I assessed the urgency of the request. Okay, so that was the first goal, what you're trying to do. And then you describe how did you do it? So how did you actually assess the urgency of the request? I did this by looking at XYZ. Okay, so you see how it's being really clear of that milestone or the objective, and then you talked about how you did it. And then you repeat. You keep it within 3 to 5 milestones and steps to make it easy to understand. Okay. So an exercise you can do, okay, because not a lot of people do this, is that you can actually, let's say, put together, like use Post-it notes of put together like the milestone 1, and you describe step 1, 2, 3 below it, and then it helps you formulate your story, overall story there. Okay. All right, then the third part 3 here is how do you conclude with the results? You always want to have a strong conclusion with a so what message, okay? Because at the end of the day, you are qualifying yourself, okay? You're not just there to tell a story. You're there to actually sell yourself. You're selling your skills, abilities, expertise there. So you want to talk about the outcome, right? As a result, or this led to, at the end of the day, or in summary. Okay, so this is already giving a clue to the interviewer that you're about to summarize the question here. Okay, and then you add in a key learning. I learned the importance of teamwork, communication skills, whatever that is. Or this experience taught me, right? Or the key lessons learned were, right? And then lastly here is think about the value, which is really connecting the dots of how this experience or this scenario that you faced is relevant and valuable to the new job. Okay, you want to make an employer focus of why they should care. Okay, so this is really that next level here. Okay, a lot of people don't do this, but if you do it, it really showcases you understand the job and understand what it takes to be successful at it. Okay, any questions? I'm going to take a pause a moment just to answer questions before I move in to the next section here, because I know I covered a lot, even in this simple framework. My goal here is really getting you to think about how you can essentially break down your thought process and your responses to be more effective and compelling. So going back to the C there, Christine, what question do you have? What are the contexts? Okay. You find this part challenging. Okay, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about this. I do find sometimes if you find this challenging, and I think this goes back to practice, because what could happen is you may get really long-winded, right? Or you may not set the context up right. So what you want to do here is really understand the context of the question as well. Like, what are they trying to understand or analyze? So if you can, and we'll go through some examples here. If you identify that they're really trying to understand your leadership, or they're trying to understand how you dealt with conflict, then you really need to hone into that specific scenario there versus talking about everything. And in an interview setting, it's okay to reuse examples, okay? As long as you take a different angle, okay? You can set the context and you can reuse it in a few different questions that will save you time in setting up that context there, okay? Yeah. You would know when you get too long-winded when, by telling the interviewers, it'd be like, okay, well, what's the point? What are you trying to say here? And this is why I talk about what was your mission. If you don't set the stage of what was your mission and what you were trying to solve, people are unclear on the journey you're about to guide them on. Okay, so you got to be clear on what your objective was. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the sample questions here. Okay. Okay, so let me see one more question. Who's saying, how would we match the so what with a job we're applying for? Would we choose a specific competency? That's a good question. How do we match a so what with job? So this is where it goes back to the question itself, and we'll go through some examples here. Is you got to think on your feet, like what are they really trying to get at? And if they ask probing questions, to give you like, okay, what are they trying to understand here? Okay. To connect the dots. So I'll give you an example. I think one of the common, I wouldn't say mistakes, but someone I've been listening to for a few lately is the difference between a hiring manager looking for someone who's more hands-on versus strategic. Okay, very different. Being strategic versus very hands-on, right? So if you understand the role itself requires someone to be very hands-on, in your examples and answers, you do want to talk about your involvement in terms of the problem you're trying to solve versus just influencing. Okay, so that's the difference in how you want to be able to connect the dots back as well, is that I have experience with that. And I recently had a client who scoped the role incorrectly, where she thought the role was more strategic because it was a leadership role, whereas they were actually looking for someone more hands-on, which then impacted her strategy and how she went in of selling herself there. Okay? So maybe this will help as we go through some examples together. So one of the question, that's on adaptability or change management is, tell me about a time when you were asked to do something you had never done before. How did you react? What did you learn? Okay. So this, I would say any of you could get a question like this, right? Where you run in a situation where you've never saw that kind of problem before, and how did you react, and what did you learn? So let's dissect this. Like, they're really trying to understand what they're trying to understand, how resourceful you are. Okay. When you're faced with a problem that you've never dealt with, how resourceful are you? Calm in these situations. Do you need to go ask, let's say, your boss or what to do, or understand like what's your approach to that? How you maybe even handle stress as well. There's some things I could be looking for there. Okay. But this is what I would consider a pretty common question in terms of adaptability and change. So in the context, I'm going to give you some things to think about what to highlight. Okay, I won't be to give you a script because everyone's going to be different, but I want to give you what I consider sound bites or punchlines that you can think about of what you want to highlight that will resonate with the interviewer. So for example, you want to talk about a new challenge where you face a lot of uncertainty and complexity. Okay, so that's a context that you can set up. You wanted to be able to say that your task or your goal, your mission was to ensure a smooth execution, right? The launch of a campaign or a new project, whatever that problem you're trying to solve, that you were tasked to do that. And so how did you do it? It's the action here. And so I'm going to give you some examples. You want to talk about how you reacted like level-headed and saw it as an opportunity to learn and grow. Okay, because they may be looking, trying to understand your attitude toward change or new problems. Okay. Another one could be you had an end goal in mind with a game plan, right? Which showcased that, okay, you've dealt with something maybe similar before and you understood that importance of, okay, I need to understand what my end goal is and have a game plan. Okay. And then you can elaborate further, like what does that look like? I'm giving a very high level here, but I want to give you some of these words that you can use to help you articulate yourself more effectively. And the R is that, you kind of talk about what the result is, that you delivered on time and within budget. Okay, that's something that you want to, hiring managers love to hear that, right? Did you deliver on time and within budget? They love hearing that. And then a lesson could be you learn to be adaptable, resourceful, calm under pressure, and you learn how to embrace change. Okay, so these are sound bites that you can use in an interview. Okay, everyone will have a different story, but these are the things that, as an interviewer, they want to understand, like, hey, these are some things that either you've learned or that you're able to achieve. Okay. All right, so moving on to question 2, which is a question around collaboration, conflict management. Pretty sure you're going to get a question something like this. Give an example of when you had to work with someone who was difficult to get along with. How did you handle the interactions with that person? Okay. Even though you may think that you've never had conflict with anyone, you still need to give an answer. They're really trying to understand, at the end of the day, how do you handle bad experiences or awkward situations? Are you the type where you avoid conflict, or that you will actually have like an open and honest conversation? That's what they're really trying to understand. Okay, so for the context, you can talk about your general approach and attitude towards conflict. Okay, so this is where you can actually talk about, right, how you deal with conflict. What's your attitude towards it? Do you usually be the type where you'll just have an open, honest conversation with someone right away, or do you actually like to take the time to reflect on it first before you have a conversation with someone? What's the approach? Okay. Next is you can talk about what's the goal. Your goal was to resolve the tension or misunderstanding. Okay, that's the goal. Then you move into the action here. So you can talk about that you assess the risk and impact, right? So for example, like if you're in a project management role and if you don't deal with this conflict, what could be the negative impact or the risk if you don't deal with it? You can talk about how you communicated to understand the person's situation, strengths, weaknesses, goals, and interest. right? So this is like, how you deal with that person, right? To understand how you can really motivate them or understand where they're coming from, okay? Now, I'm sure there's more actions here. Okay? I'm just sharing a couple to help you and guide you through. The R is the result here, where you ensured alignment and gained trust. So that could be the outcome, right? The positive outcome here is that you were able to solve the issue and you're able to gain alignment and trust at the end of the day. You can talk about how maybe how you improved the productivity and performance because that you've actually dealt with this conflict. And some of the lessons learned was the importance of having, authentic communication, transparency, and about motivating people. Okay, so you see how these could be some like guiding words to guide you through. Okay, these are some things that are clues that a manager would be looking for there. Okay. And this is a balance between when we say being specific or even strategic as well. That you want to be able to tell a story, be a great storyteller. However, you also want to think about what is my message? What is it I really want to highlight about this story about me here? Okay. Okay, so the next question is the leadership and prioritization, okay? Which is tell me about a time when you had to juggle several projects at the same time. What was the result? I'm pretty sure all of you would get some sort of version of this about time management, project management, prioritization. Okay? They're really trying to understand, it's really how you go about planning your day, how you manage your tasks, how you prioritize. So the context, you can talk about a specific time when you had multiple things happening with lots on the go. Okay, so you can paint that picture there. We had several things on the go. And the challenge was what? The challenge was being on top of the game and had to reprioritize. Okay. See, some of these things, interesting, as I'm talking about this, is that it may sound so obvious that they should know this. But, this is part of how you want to articulate it to showcase that, this is what the challenge was and this is what you had to do, and just being specific about that. The next is really the A here, which is the actions how you, let's say, assess the importance and urgency, right? Which is part of time management, what's important and what's urgent. You decided what to focus on and set deadlines. You communicated the priorities. Okay, so these are like some of the sound bites or punchlines that you can use there. And R is the result, is that you've met project timelines at the end of the day, right? They want to know how you resolve the issue. Were you able to meet timelines? And then the lesson learned could be that you learn to be laser focused on what's truly important and critical and learn to say no, right? That's a big one. Some of you, we talked about that in terms of setting boundaries, learning to say no. And that you learn that how you have the importance of blocking off uninterrupted time in order to get the task done there. Okay. So this is, I would say, an example that any of you could get as an example like this, and it's up to you of how you want to paint that picture in terms of the scope or the significance of the work there. Okay. Okay, so the next one here is around leadership and growth potential and adaptability. Give an example of when you had to go above the call of duty. So this could be another way to word this is give an example of when you weren't sure what to do, or give an example when your boss was not available for you to handle the task and you had to go above and beyond. Okay, so this is about around like how do you deal with also either it could be how you deal with uncertainty or how you identify an opportunity to really raise the bar and to do things outside of your core job as well, right? And showcasing that you care about like the company's performance there. So context could be how you talk about how you seize the opportunity to contribute and add more value. Right. So just by even saying this, it shows that your outlook or towards like being, that you care about your work, that someone that you're ambitious and driven, that you showed ambition and willingness to go above and beyond. Okay. So that's what you're trying to highlight when you're setting up this context here of how you saw this as a great opportunity. The action is that you talk about how you identified the opportunity, you created a game plan, and that how you raise standard of excellence. Okay. So this is like that punchline, but obviously there's going to be, you got to elaborate further. And when you respond in the question there, like what did that actually look like? What did that entail there? Okay, so they are here. The result is you can talk about how maybe you weren't recognized for your outstanding performance, or that your boss really appreciated what you did, or you received really positive feedback from management. Um, and you really learned the importance of being proactive, eager, and resourceful there. Okay, so these are some of the words that you can articulate as, because these are things that they would like to hear there. Okay. All right, the next one is around influence and persuasion. Tell me your recent success in pitching to a client or senior management. Okay, so whether you are in a sales role or not, you would still need to pitch to maybe senior management to gain buy-in there. Okay. Okay, so the context could be your goal was to get a new client or management's buy-in. You want to set up that situation there. And you want to talk about the complexity and significance of engagement with a key strategy. Okay, so if you are working, let's say, on, like, let's say, a top priority project, or you were trying to get this new big client, you want to paint that picture, like, what did that entail? This is like a multi-million-dollar project, of why this was so important to be able to really, close a deal, for example. And the action. You can say, like, that first of all is you understand the need, right? Really understand the need and the objective here. You could say that you evaluate the options, and that you tailor the solution and customize the presentation to the audience needs. Okay, so these are those sound bites, and you want to elaborate, what did that entail? Okay, how did you do that? The outcome, which is the result, is what you can say: you sold X product or solution or idea. You learn that it's important to be prepared and curious. Oh, okay. So these are some of the ideas here. Okay. Any questions so far? Is this good? Good. Okay. I see some good nodding here. Okay. Awesome. And we'll have time to do some discussions as well. All right. All right. Last question here is around analysis and persuasion. Describe how you use data and insights to help create a compelling story and persuade a client or internal group to take a specific action. Okay, so this is around the analytical piece and also around the influence and persuasion piece. Okay, this is, I would say, pretty common for those who are in an analytics type of role or finance type of role. To really showcase in terms of, and sometimes what they're looking for is, especially if you're in an analytical role or numbers driven role, is how do you simplify the story here, right? You may have a lot of complex data or information. How do you really simplify the so what? Like, what's the story that you're trying to tell? And how do you really convince management to say yes or prove to whatever you're trying to move forward with? Okay, so the context would be, you talk maybe the complexity of the data, and your task was to synthesize the data and simplify the story here. Okay, so that was like the mission. The action, you talk about how understanding you understood the end goal, created a roadmap, and anticipated questions to help you, pitch this presentation there. Okay. And then the result is what? You got approval, approval of the project, or, the money that you were asking for. You learn that it's so important to be thorough and understand the implications and the risk as well. And you learn to communicate with confidence. Okay, so these are just some examples here. So let me wrap up. Some of the key learnings from this is, one, you really want to know the job specific competencies, right? This goes back to, for any preparation, is really understand the need of the buyer. Okay, what's important to them, and to help you then understand, okay, what are the stories and examples that you want to share? Okay, and you want to know that. You want to know the marketing sound bites and the steps. So going back to those headline statements, what are those keywords that you really want to use that will resonate with them? Because here's the thing, for those like interviewers who are taking notes, oftentimes they're not able to take every detailed note. They can really only take the sound bites. And this is why I really push for these sound bite statements of what I've been sharing with you here. If you can just articulate that, they're going to write that out, and then you elaborate further. Fourth is to know your value and impact, right? This goes back to the result, the outcome. And lastly is to know your lessons learned, okay? Because this all ties back to connecting the dots and how you become a stronger leader or candidate to elevate to that next level in your career there. Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's talk. We have time here. We have another 15 minutes that we can chat. Okay, so Chris, you said it. It looks like the key is to not overthink and know the key competencies of the job, which is increasing knowing technology. Yes, it's really about understanding. I find that interviewers are helpful at redirecting when we don't answer the question the way they want. Yes, they will ask to probe further, and this is where you need to, receive those clues here and to like reframe as well. Okay, thinking on your feet is so key. Absolutely. Thinking on your feet worthy of another training. I think we can talk, and this is all practice here. For example, how do we properly ask clarifying questions during the interview? That's a good question there. I mean, and this is where, some of the techniques is around either you try to rephrase a question or try to understand what they're asking. And then asking like, would you be able to clarify the question of what you're looking for? And that's part of the confidence piece in terms of asking. It's totally okay to ask clarifying questions. You don't want to do it for every single question, but a few of them, it's totally okay there. And it's totally okay if you get questions where it require you to solve, like say, like a numbers problem, where they're asking you like, how would you figure this out? Like what I call like situational questions. That could be another training. And to actually jot down your thoughts of how you would do, let's say, the math or the numbers to walk through your analysis there. Okay. I have seen like when I have seen like in-person interviews where, especially if you get these problem solving questions or case study questions, interviewers actually prefer that you actually either speak about how you're thinking through your process or actually write it down, let's say on a whiteboard on a piece of paper of how you're actually solving the problem there, because they're trying to understand your problem solving approach. Okay. Good. All right. Any other questions? Is this good? Helpful? Yeah. What are some of your key learnings or key takeaways, or what are some things that you feel you need to work on based on the practice that you've been doing so far? What are the key reminders for yourself of what you need to keep in mind?
I took myself off mute.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Because it's easier than typing, but I think I just need more practice because the confidence piece, lack thereof, is showing. Because when I ask a question, the answer that I get is more like encouraging cheerleading, which is not what I wanted. It's like I'm asked, I need more detail from the interviewer. And they're being very vague in their question that they're asking, like very general question. I was asking for more specifics, and they just redirect and they go back to just, oh yeah, you're answering it the way that I want. It's all good. So I want more detail on how to ask the right questions, but I guess this is very specific to the job description.
How to ask specific questions from the interview, for you to clarify with the interviewer, you mean?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so that's different. So that's more than, I guess, more clue into how that's more like how you would engage with them in terms of. So this is where you want to ask questions. It's like, in terms of not just like necessarily the question itself. It could be, what is important to you? What does success really look like in this ideal candidate? And that would give you some clues as well. It could just be a simple redirect to that, and that's, you can be like, okay,
That's a good
acknowledge
question.
that. Yeah, that's good to know. And that's something I would love to highlight more. One of the questions I have a client who loves to ask at the end of the interview is, he'll ask, is there any, how does he ask it? It's basically he asks, is there anything that you're concerned about my candidacy that will, is there any reservation about my candidacy that you need more clarification on? So that basically helps understand what are those potential rejection points that the interviewer may have. And that's like your last opportunity to clarify further at the very end, or even follow up with an email there. He has found that really helpful. Like he's more direct and assertive as well. So he'll be able to ask, like, is there anything that you're concerned about that you would like me to clarify further there? Okay. Now I would avoid asking, how did I do in the interview? Or ask for feedback of how I did in the interview. That is awkward when it's especially during the interview. I've seen candidates ask that, and it usually does not go well. And they'll come, the hiring manager will come tell me like it was a very awkward asking for the feedback in the moment there. So avoid asking those type of questions. Okay. Okay, so Hussein asks, I tend to memorize my answers to behavioral questions. Would this be helpful? So the key here is you really want to try to be authentic and conversational. I would say from my experience is obviously interviewers know that you could be like a little nervous. They can tell if you are trying to memorize or you're trying to recite an answer the way you talk, because it may sound a bit more monotone or it may sound a bit robotic as well. So I would say here it is a key is to practice. One of the things I tend to do is if you tend to be type where you, let's say, write out all your answers, try to remove the notes and try to do another version where it's more in point form. Okay, so if you see how even today's training, I really try to break it down into sections and just have like the keywords. So try to just give yourself clues with keywords versus in a sentence format there so that you can also be more fluid and dynamic in the conversation there. Okay. Because what could happen is if you are in that mode of memorizing, you are not connecting with the interviewer and you may not be present with the interviewer and you may not really be listening to the clues. Okay, so that could be the downfall if you're trying to be perfect with the answer there. Okay. Even for me as a speaker and a trainer, I have learned many years ago, like I used to also try to speak from a script. And I have learned over the years is to really understand the overall vision of what I'm trying to say, the key points I'm trying to hit, and to be able to go with the flow in the moment as well. And I find that much more fluid there. Okay. Yes, it means I have to dig back my memories and search what I had done. Yes, oftentimes if you have a 10+ year career, and this is why it's important to do these exercises, it's the reflection piece of the work that you've done. And from my experience, those who've also taken the time to really update or refresh their resume also helps with this interview prep piece as well, because you're already thinking about accomplishments and results there. Okay. Good. Lily says, I have 3 key examples that can be tweaked depending if they're looking for communication, leadership, or conflict management. That's good. To be honest with you, you really, from my experience in interviewing, you really only need in an interview setting, but especially only like a half an hour, 45 minute, or max an hour, you can really only cover, I would say, 5 examples. No more than that. Okay. You can have more examples ready, but really for people to remember, you really only need about 5 key examples there. Okay, so you really want to have really good examples. Right? And I challenge you, it's really that exercise like peeling the onion, right? You may have this example, just keep asking, so what? So what? So what? So what? And looking at from all different perspectives and angles to help you essentially, I guess be dynamic in an interview that you could take it in different directions there. Okay, good stuff. Anything else? Okay, so Ning has, when I prepare for behavior questions, I have one great example referred as a 5-star story, can be tailored to answer different questions. For example, to showcase how you adapt to changing situation, how to handle stress. So during the interview, since I can't anticipate what questions will be asked, should I go with a 5-star story for the first behavioral question when it comes out? So during the interview, since I can't anticipate what question will be asked, should I go with the 5-star story for the first behavior question? I'm not sure if I understand it fully here, Ning. So I think I want to say it depends. I would say that yes, you can have these general questions prepared for, and I think depending on what they ask specifically, you still need to tweak accordingly there. To me, at the end of the day, are you answering the question? Right? And so that's the most important thing. Are you answering that? If you're answering the question, that's great, right? So sometimes as an interviewer, I'd say are they actually answering the question there? If you aren't, and I would say as an interviewer, usually they should have asked probing questions to clarify further. But I would say what I consider examples that are what I consider I'm thinking your 5-star example story could mean that it's like one of the absolute like home run type examples here. So to me, whether it's right out the gate or not, like throughout the interview, you should be sharing that example. If that is an example that's really going to showcase your qualifications, that's an example you should be using over and over again. Okay. One of the questions I always get is it okay for me to repeat this example with different interviewers? Absolutely. The key here is consistency. You actually want to be consistent so that you can be memorable, because you want all the other interviewers to be like, oh yeah, she talked about this example. And that was a great one. Okay. These are good questions. And I can tell the way you're asking these questions is also through your experience in interviewing of things that you may have feel that you're not sure of as well. And to be honest, you're right. There are tons of questions. I've only covered, let's say, 7 sample ones. But one thing I could tell you from my experience is there are definitely those general questions around, let's say, problems. And there could be like different types of problems that you're going to get asked, right? Or conflict, things that didn't go well. So there could be either related to a conflict with a person, didn't go well with a project, or a challenging situation that you faced with. You're always going to get some sort of those questions there. So for example, Amazon, for example, they love asking questions about failures. They're not trying to see like how you failed. They're really trying to understand, how did you get back up? How did you demonstrate resiliency? What did you learn from that experience? How did you become stronger? That's what they're trying to understand there. So I think it's important to recognize these difficult questions. It's not meant to try to trick you. It's really just to see you as a human being of how you respond to situations there. Okay. Anything else? Good? Yeah, so Hussein asks, when getting a question where we have a conflict or challenge, is it helpful to try and find an example of how we turn things around? Absolutely, right? Remember at the beginning I talked about behavioral, the purpose of behavioral questions is they're trying to assess your past performance to predict your future behavior or performance, right? So if you give an example where you could give an example that you weren't able to solve it, but you got to talk about like, what did you learn from it? What would you do differently? Okay. But ideally you do want to be able to give an example of how did you at least resolve, even if it's not completely resolved, at least mitigate the situation there. Okay. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, if you have to, let's just even look at bigger picture of all this, like what you're trying to tell here, you're answering questions to qualify yourself. And you're also trying to tell a story of your personal brand, your style, your way of thinking, your way of approaching problems. And you're trying to highlight essentially some specific skills and expertise that you bring to the table there. Okay. Especially when it comes to final round interviews are really trying to compare, like, well, this person may have more of this experience, but this person may have more expertise in this area. And this person may be really good with, like, let's say relationships. Like, what are they really looking for? And they're trying to debate, like, what's going to be more important at the end of the day. They're trying to debate that. From my experience, there's no perfect candidate or like the home run candidate. At the end of the day, interviewers and hiring managers need to make choices on what's critical, what's really important at this stage in their hiring process, and what their needs are and what they're trying to solve. All right. Okay, good stuff. So this was good. So as a challenge, I give you guys a quick challenge for the motivational questions to record yourself, like the why me, or why hire you, or tell me about yourself. Here, I would say pick a few questions that you really want to hone in on. Perhaps it could be like the conflict problems that you're not comfortable with, like try practicing and record yourself. Or it could be maybe you're in a leadership position and you really want to be able to answer how you really lead people, how you influence and delegate. You can talk about that. Okay. It could be a positive one. You know how I had like those yin and yang, the highs and lows. It could also be like a very positive experience that you faced, and how was it like a great success there that you can highlight there. Okay. The key here is it is practice. Okay. Practice, practice, practice. Read through like different questions and examples of how you would tackle it there. If you're not sure how to answer a question, you can just acknowledge it and say, like, take a break and say, that's a good question. Let me take a moment to think about it. Right. And to think about that. And if you really don't have an answer, like if you really, really can't think about it, you can say maybe like, I don't have an answer right now. Can we move on to another question? And I'll get back to you on this question later on. Okay. That's another way that you can also buy time there. Okay. So Vivian has a question here. When it comes to conflict, like several projects come among similar times, I understand sometimes we have to say no. I do say no sometimes to be realistic, but I know people don't like the answer no. Any alternatives to answer this? Okay. That's a great one, right? How do you, so this goes back to, it's like, how do you handle no respectfully and gracefully? You know, and it's like, how do you do essentially say no, and how do you position it, right? Positioning whether maybe that we have other priorities right now, or this is something urgent from senior management. Those are things that you can talk about there, okay? Of how you've essentially, how you essentially handle no's respectfully. Any software where we can record ourselves. Zoom is a great one. You know, you guys have been using Zoom. Zoom is a great one. Even using just your phone is a good one. On your computer, depending on what software. Like I know for Mac, like QuickTime Player. That's another one. But I would say even just using your phone or Zoom, or those are two great ones. Another one that I use is Loom, Loom. And it could record your screen or record yourself, but essentially it just records the video in the cloud, and you can easily share that with me as well. So you can just record that and just send the link to share. Some of you may have seen that through like the feedback I've given you and like through resumes there. Okay. Oh, Vidyard. Yeah, Vidyard is also great as well. Yeah, that's another one. I think, is that for live stream as well, Vidyard? Christine? Yeah, I've heard of, yeah, Vidyard or stream. Yeah, Vidyard. I've heard of that one too. That's another one. Okay. Good stuff. Any other questions before we wrap up here? Oh, this is good. Well, you guys are doing great. Okay. I intentionally decided to do 2 of these interview trainings because I know a lot of you have either interviews coming up or in the interview process. So I want to help you get extra prepared as well and be more confident. I know I have, like in my interview course, I have like the interview training that I cover as well. But this is new, where I cover more specific, deeper dive into actually how to answer like behavioral questions and motivational questions there. So I really hope this was helpful, and this helps you think differently as well of how you want to approach your interview there. Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the week, and we will connect soon. All right, take care. Bye now.